Okay, we are now on the record. So this meeting is about FRAND royalty rate determination and understanding the economic worth of FRAND. Jeff, what is your elevator pitch in terms of how to calculate FRAND rates, what the value of FRAND rates should be, must be, could be, and where you see future directions going in that area? You're muted, Jeff. You need to unmute yourself.
Good morning, all, or evening, or afternoon. Thank you all for coming. The issue of how to determine FRAND rates and what to do about issues like hold up and hold out are obviously significant issues which are far from being resolved in our industry. In summary, I would say that I think that where there are and let me back up by saying that a great deal of my experience and much of my perspective today will be in the context of the way in which patent pools go about licensing. And patent pools to me means those pools that abide by the guidance of various competition agencies around the world on what constitutes an appropriate patent pool. And so that perspective colors the presentation that I will be giving today. So firstly, I think that as to methodology for determining FRAND rates, I think that where there is a large body of licenses that have been negotiated, not as a result of litigation, but simply as a result of parties sitting with each other, that comparable licenses are the best benchmark for what are FRAND rates. FRAND, of course, is essentially a regulatory mechanism to deal with the situation where there's potential market failure because of the fact that licensors hold patents that are essential to the practice of the standard. But as a result of that, they are an attempt to serve as a proxy for the market. So where we see the market actually operating in terms of willingly negotiated licenses, I think we should take those seriously. Other methodologies strike me as is so often the case, as being theoretically meaningful, but extremely difficult to put into practice. And that includes top-down and bottoms-up and issues of that nature. Secondly, I think that that hold-out continues to be a significant issue here. Again, I'm speaking in terms of pools. I have very little insight into the world of bilateral negotiation, but we see that in pools you have a combination of a very large number of companies who willingly sign licenses and a small number of companies, usually the largest ones, but not always, that hold out and continue to hold out. And that is an issue that I think is not well addressed by the most recent decision in InterDigital versus Lenovo. And finally, I'd say that where there is transparency, as there is by and large in the world of patent pools, that the transparency helps make it possible for licenses to be negotiated on a willing basis. And at the same time, the transparency enables both parties, assuming that it is mutual, enables both parties to come to the table with a meaningful knowledge base without wasting a lot of time in negotiations, exploring what the license offer is, for example. And the last point, I think that where royalty rates are stated in terms of a set price, that is a certain number of cents per unit, for example, that avoids a great many of the difficulties that come from stating license rates as a percentage, including the determination of what's the appropriate base for the percentage. Thanks.
Dan, what about your views and take on the topic?
Thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. I'm going to speak on my own behalf, just get that on the recording. I come from a perspective of being an IP strategist and advisor for a large famous company that has over 25,000 patents of its own around the world. And we participate in many standards bodies. We obviously use standards in our products. as it so happens, very, very few of those standards have any patent monetization activity whatsoever. And for most of our standards that we contribute to, most of the standards that we use, there would be no need for a webinar on sub-licensing because there practically is no sub-licensing. So my perspective is informed by the economic needs, the business needs around standards, about being able to advise executives on the cost of using various standards. And my main hope and desire is for economic rationality, but also for the predictability and the transparency that Jeff mentioned. And I'm very close to the technology, being in house, and I see the complexity of our products. The fact that even if they include standards, they may include multiple standards, only a handful of which may be subject to monetization. I see that there are many other technologies that are necessary to make our product successful, and that even the standards themselves to be able to carry them out requires a lot of complementary supporting technologies. Standards often come implemented on chips. They have to be fabricated. They are associated, in the case of wireless standards, with antennas and analog components. In the case of video, with display, with camera technology, and so on. So I can't avoid thinking about economic rationality and what is the incremental value of the inventions that we are sometimes asked to pay for a license for. And with that comes some skepticism of certain things, certain features of the existing marketplace. One is some qualified skepticism, I would say, of the comparable license approach, because I feel like that to the extent that there's a market, it's somewhat artificial, that the market is imposed by the consequences of not reaching a license, which comes from obviously enforcement bodies rather than from a free negotiation between parties, like a normal component in a product. Also a deep skepticism of the appropriateness of injunctions, because I see how an injunction on even one patent becomes leverage to exclude somebody from an important market, and directs a value discussion away from incremental value invention towards loss of access to the market. And frankly, a skepticism of how the overall licensing world is architected, with effectively a spider web of bilateral negotiations. And this goes directly to my preference for top down. I think that since we're looking at the cost of implementing the standard, a single bilateral negotiation doesn't tell us very much. We need to understand the totality, and that's the right starting place. So those are some of the themes that are going to come up today, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Because quite a few people joined late, very warmly welcome to our webinar. We'd just like to reiterate this webinar is under Chatham House rules, so you cannot attribute views to individual speakers. And the views expressed here in this webinar are not those of Oxford, of Cisco, of competition, law partners, of Access Advanced, or any other company. That the views of the speakers, and the speakers reserve the right to change their opinion over time. In a word, they're not the views of anyone. With all of this being said, I'll now stop the recording.